Bill Cunningham, the great American, of course, the issue of transgender rights and women's rights, etc. After the Olympics, we had some of the fallout from that. There were two identified XY male boxers identifying as women who beat the crap out of the female boxers and won the gold medals. And the topic has been certainly addressed forcefully by Kara Dansky, the author of The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls, and also the book, The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. And Kara Dansky, welcome to the Bill Cunningham Show. And Kara, first of all, a year or two ago, I can recall all the celebrations about 50 years of Title IX. And if somebody would have told those who put together Title IX some 50-some years ago that this thing would be morphed into what it is today, would they have been shocked, or is this just the abolition of rights? Give me your perspective on what's happening with transgender rights, especially with men playing women's sports in the locker room and blurring the lines between male and female.
It's such an important question, and thank you for having me on. Yeah, Title IX was enacted in 1972. Fast forward 50 years, and the Biden administration in June of 2022 proposed a complete rewrite of Title IX's implementing regulations. Specifically, what that rewrite would do is redefine the word sex to include the amorphous and sexist and nebulous concept of gender identity. And that final rule, that proposed rule became final in April of this year. And a lot of people are battling it out in the courts, and I can talk to you a lot about that. I do want to make very clear, though, yes, the titles of my book are exactly as you read them, my books. Exactly as you read them. I'm a lifelong Democrat, and that's part of what makes me a little bit unique in this space. Many of your listeners may not realize it. There are rank-and-file Democrats all over this country who are completely fed up with what party leadership is doing on this topic. And but there's no reason your listeners would have any reason to know that, because most media outlets will not platform those of us who are speaking out against gender identity from the political left. So thank you in particular for having me on for that reason.
And, of course, gender identity is a fluid concept. I guess I could identify as a different gender, and there might be as many as 105 or 19 different genders, and it's self-identification. I can't identify as a left-hander and play golf, but I guess I can identify as a female and take advantage of that. And I would think this is an issue that moms and dads and grandparents and granddads and grandmothers care about. And just a few days ago, a week or so ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, temporarily, and it's only temporarily, kept the status quo, which is to hold back for the time being what's going to happen with Title IX being redefined. And ultimately, it'll be ferreted out and clear away maybe sometime next year. But the issue of how gender identity, can you tell me why we're here? Because I'm a conservative Republican / libertarian. I tend to vote Republican, but I vote for Democrats too. You're a self-identified Democrat, and I would assume somewhat liberal. But why don't more mothers and daughters and aunties look at this issue and say, what does this mean if a man can become a woman or vice versa? What does it mean for gender identity and also sex discrimination, which I guess doesn't exist anymore, because if one's gender is amorphous, it goes back and forth, then there is no difference in the sexes. And I'd love Title IX. I think it's a great idea. I'm glad it worked out. Why aren't more people grasping on the issue, do you think?
Right. So I just want to agree with you. Gender identity is a ridiculous concept. It's just an absolutely ridiculous concept that has no grounding in reality. If a person wants to have a gender identity, I suppose they can, but that doesn't make the person not either female or male. Every single one of us, all 8 billion of us, are all either female or male. So I just wanted to get that out there. Why don't more speak out? You know, it's interesting. A lot of people on the left still don't understand what's going on. That's changing. People are getting educated. You mentioned the Olympics. That was a pivotal moment. But I can tell you that I personally know a woman who is a Democrat whose daughter was competing in the Ivy Leagues in 2022 and had to compete against Leah or Will Thomas in the NCAA swimming finals in the women's category. That was her first exposure to this issue. She first learned about it in late 2021, and she educated herself about it. And then she turned around in 2022 and started a new organization called the Independent Council on Women's Sports, precisely for this reason, for moms and dads to get involved in protecting single-sex sports for women and girls. A lot of people still don't know, and a lot of people are still scared, unfortunately. I just want to say, for any listeners out there who are still scared to speak out about this, you can just say right out loud that a woman is an adult human female. People will be mad at you. People will yell at you. You might get canceled. I've been canceled. I've been yelled at by friends and family members. That's okay. It's perfectly fine just to say the truth right out loud.
So as we're formed in the womb, we get X and X or X and Y, and that's it. There's no XYX or XY or YYX. It's one or the other, and that's it. When I hear that...
Let me jump in on that just for a second. It's slightly more complicated than that, and this is where the issue with what happened in the Olympics gets a little confusing. So generally speaking, you are absolutely right. I understand from doctors I've spoken with, developmental biologists, evolutionary biologists, the vast majority of the time, every single fetus is either XX or XY. However, it is true that there is a tiny sliver of the population who have differences of sexual development, which means that they have a slightly different chromosomal makeup other than XX or XY. That is approximately 0.02% of the population. That's a legitimate medical condition. Those people who have that condition have really serious medical conditions and problems that they have to work out with their families and their doctors. That's a real thing, and that needs to be addressed medically. But that has nothing to do with quote unquote gender identity or quote unquote trans.
Let's play this out, say 10 or 15 years from now. Let's say the U.S. Supreme Court somehow expands Title IX's definition to include identity as opposed to sex orientation, whatever it might be. The Supreme Court says, okay, we buy the liberal democratic argument in 5 or 10 or 15 years that one can self-identify as a different gender than one appears to be. Tell me the world, say in 2035, 2040, when some little 3 or 4-year-old girl wants privacy in her high school locker room, or she wants to play sports, get in the Olympics, or she wants to go on the LPGA tour and she can't because of males hitting the ball 50 yards farther. Can you play out, Kara Dansky, what happens if this goes the liberal Democratic Kamala Harris way, and Kamala Harris and her type wins the argument? What does America look like in 2035?
So if that happens, women and girls will have lost everything we have fought since, for centuries to gain. We fought for the right to vote. And, at the time that we had to fight for the right to vote, everybody knew what a woman was. Everybody knew who was excluded from the franchise. Nobody was confused about what the words male and female meant when women weren't allowed to vote. And, by the way, I have made very close common cause with a lot of conservative Republican women who understand that if they have the right to vote for Republicans, they have first-wave feminists to thank for that. And I'm very grateful to the conservative Republican women that I have had the great pleasure to work with over the years in protecting women and girls as a sex class. But the other thing is that in the 1960s and 70s, and many of your listeners may disagree with this, but feminists made huge gains for women and girls. So, for example, we set up domestic violence shelters so that women could flee abusive relationships. No one at a domestic violence shelter asks for the political affiliation of a woman who's fleeing violence. And it was feminists who set up all these things. We set up rape crisis shelters. We got the right to have credit cards. We won a lot of things over the course of the 1960s and 70s, including Title IX. All of that is gone if the Democrats in power get their way. And I want to stress it's the Democrats in power. It's not rank-and-file Democrats who are pushing this. It truly isn't. I have spoken to so many rank-and-file Democrats who are saying, if the Democrats don't change their course on this, I'm just not going to vote for them ever again. Some are saying, you know what, forget the Democratic Party, I'm becoming independent. Some of them are saying, you know what, I've had enough, I'm voting for Trump in November. So rank-and-file Democrats are not in lockstep with party leadership on this. And part of what is so frustrating, you may have seen that I wrote an open letter to Kamala Harris, who I have met before. And I'm saying, look, stand up, do the right thing at the DNC. Do I think she's going to do that? No, I do not. No. I don't think that for a second. No. But Martina Navratilova, the tennis champ, put my open letter to Kamala Harris on her Twitter. And that means that, several 100,000 people saw it who otherwise may not have. And so my hope in writing something like that is not that I'm actually going to persuade Kamala Harris to do the right thing. My hope is that I will persuade ordinary Americans across the political spectrum to take a stand up, say what is true, and really work together just as ordinary Americans across the political spectrum to get this done. If our leaders aren't going to do it, we need to do it ourselves.
You know, I've practiced law for many years. I've represented many battered women, generally men that do the battering. I have a wife who's been a great appellate judge, and I look at my little granddaughter, and I'm thinking the last thing I want is for her to be in a situation where she's competing against males in sports or in high school or college situations. I think women are better than men. I think women live longer than men. I think women are better people than men. And the idea that we're going to blur the differentials between male and female to benefit is 0.02, maybe 0.02 at the cost of so many tens of millions of girls and women is sickening. Of course, my wife, when she went to law school, in her class, it was the first class in which the majority of the students were female. Females dominate in the colleges. Males are the ones who don't graduate in the same rates, put in the same time. I think men don't mature till they're 25 or 30 years old. Women tend to do it a bit earlier because they're better human beings. Now, having said that, I'm shocked that more liberal females who always vote Democratic are going to look at this issue and say, you know what, Kamala Harris is right, the Democratic Party is correct, that one sex is fluid. You can be male one year, female the next based upon advantages. There's no such a thing, therefore, as sex discrimination because you don't know what gender you're dealing with. You can go the opposite direction. There goes Title IX. There goes all kinds of protections for women that ought to be in the marketplace and ought to be in the law. It's all ruled unconstitutional because there's not a difference. They're all the same. No one's a male, no one's a female, and you move back and forth. Why don't more women figure this out, Kara? Can you tell me that?
Well, I think that it's not true that women are the rank and file female Democrat voters are in favor of this. They're not. They truly aren't. You just can't see it because the media will not platform the liberal women's opposition to this. So it's not in the public eye. You other than this conversation that we're having right now, which I'm very grateful for, you would have no reason to know. There are countless women all over this country who are speaking out in their communities and in their families. They just can't get a voice in the mainstream legacy media.
Why?
So
Why?
The mainstream
Why?
Because the mainstream legacy media is invested in Americans not understanding that we are actually much more united on this topic than we are divided.
Is there a political reason? Is it such hatred of Trump and Republicans, or is it, well, what's the motivation to say, Gayle King, for example, CBS Morning, she ought to be right out there speaking loud and proud about women and girls, and they're different, and we have to have sex discrimination laws ought to exist. Title IX means something. Navratilova has spoken out. Hardly anyone else has. Why?
So that's when you have to look at the money. And so that's where I want to encourage listeners to visit something called the 11th Hour blog, literally the number 11, 11thhourblog.com. It's written by a woman named Jennifer Billick, who has done some unbelievably impressive journalistic investigation into the money behind what is pushing all of this. I want everyone in America to become familiar with names like Tim Gill, who runs something called the Gill Foundation, which is based in Colorado, and Rolling Stone has called him a mega donor to the Democratic Party. I want everyone to get familiar with the name John Stryker. He's a man who founded something called the Arcus Foundation, which funds millions and millions of dollars worth of, quote, trans and queer liberation movements. I want everyone to be familiar with the name Martine Rothblatt. He's also a multimillionaire. He runs an organization called Terasem, Terasem. He views it as a religion. He thinks that we can all become completely non-sex. He thinks that we can move beyond our biology as human beings. And, you know, I start to sound a little conspiratorial here, I realize, but if Martine Rothblatt were just some weirdo typing out crazy theories on a computer in his basement, I wouldn't be worried about it. But Martine Rothblatt is a multimillionaire who's been featured in New York Magazine. He's been featured on NBC. He's been on Oprah. So this man has influence. He has a platform. He calls himself a woman. His name is Martin. He was born Martin. He calls himself Martine. You get the picture, right?
Yeah. I think this is wonderful. This is one thing as a grandfather and as a parent, I believe in this. This is bad. This is bad stuff. And if legally this issue is lost, the gains of women since 1972 are gone.
Yes, of course. And also we can't forget pharma. And so we can't forget the scandal of a medical establishment that is putting an entire generation's worth of young people, minors and young adults, on hormones and giving them surgeries that are utterly irreversible and that cause permanent damage, including loss of sexual function, loss of reproductive function, bone density loss, sometimes long-term disease, including cancer. And there's an industry that stands to benefit from doing that,
Billions.
and that's called pharma.
Billions of dollars. We got to run. Kara Dansky, author of The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. Also the book, The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. Once again, Kara Dansky, this is wonderful. Thank you. Get the message out, and the truth will set us all free. And Kara Dansky, once again, thank you for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. And perhaps we'll do it again later in the year, but thank you very much.
I'd love that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kara. Kara Dansky. Wow. Bill Cunningham, the Great American, live with you every Sunday night.